The calf she raised from birth was butchered on her step. A Lakota chief gave her living land. I am going to tell you something I have told no one. Not my brother Chask, who has known me longer than anyone still living. Not the elders who came to sit with me the winter after when they had questions about my choices. Not even the river, which I have told most things over most of my life, because the river does not keep score. I am going to tell you about the woman named Nora Ellsworth, and the calf she raised from birth, and what I did after I saw what they left on her step. I am going to tell you about the land I gave her, and the men I stood between her and the morning she stopped being afraid of me. And I am going to tell you what she said that morning, standing at the fence with the new-leaf cottonwoods behind her, because what she said changed what I understood about my own life. And a man who does not tell the truth about the moments that changed him is not really telling you anything at all. So, my name is Tachesk A Maza, Iron Elk in the language the white men use. I was chief of a band that wintered along the Powder River, 63 lodges when I counted them the autumn this story begins, fewer by the time the grass came back. I was 41 years old. I had been chief for 11 years, since my father's older brother died, and the elders looked at who was left and made their decision, which surprised some people but not my father's older uncle, who had told me when I was 19 that I would lead, and that I should start thinking about what that meant before it arrived. I had done that. For 22 years I had done that, thinking about what it meant to lead. Still thinking about it, I will tell you, a man who believes he has finished that thinking is a man who has stopped being a chief and started being a statue. I had 2 wives in my life. One died of fever when my son was 3, and one I divorced in the proper way when we found that we did not suit each other, and she went back to her family and remarried a good man and was content, and I was genuinely glad for her, which I think surprised her, though it should not have. I had a son who was 17 that year, Cheska Luta, Red Elk, who was everything a man could want in a son, meaning he argued with me constantly and was usually right. He had his mother's eyes and her way of looking at a problem from 3 directions before committing to one, which made him an excellent thinker and an occasionally maddening person to be in counsel with. But I had learned that the most valuable thing in a counsel is a person who does not let you get away with easy answers. I tell you all of this so you know I was not a young man on the edge of something new. I was in the middle of my life, settled into it, rooted like a cottonwood that has been in the same riverbed long enough that the river has bent itself around the tree rather than the other way. I knew who I was. I knew what I was responsible for. I knew the weight of it, which by then had become something I did not experience as a weight so much as a fact. The way you stop feeling the air you breathe. The weight was real, though. That is the other thing. Just because you stop feeling a thing as weight does not mean it stops being heavy. You carry it differently. You learn to stand differently because of it. But you know it is there, especially in the years I am talking about, when what was coming was already visible to anyone who was paying attention, and I was paying attention. The year is 1876. You need to understand that to understand everything else I'm going to tell you. The trouble with Nora Ellsworth started, from my side of things, in the middle of a night in late October. I was awake because I am usually awake in the last hours before dawn. I have been that way since I was a boy. Something in me does not trust the dark to finish its business without a witness. My grandmother said it was a mark of the night spirits choosing me, which I thought was kind of her. My father said it was probably just a nervous disposition, which I thought was accurate. In either case, the result was the same. I sat outside my lodge that night with a blanket around my shoulders, not thinking about much, watching the stars move the way they do when you are patient enough to actually watch, not looking at one star but looking at the whole of it, which is when you start to see the movement. My scout Wanbli Gleshka, Spotted Eagle, came back from his circuit and crouched beside me, and told me what he had seen 3 miles east, at the small homestead that had been standing near the cottonwood draw since the previous spring. He told me a group of riders, 8 or 9, had stopped at the homestead. He had not been close enough to hear words, he said, but he had seen them drag something from the barn. He thought it was a calf, a young one, small, maybe 4 months by the size of it. And then they had left, and after they left he had waited in the dark to see if anyone came out of the cabin, and he had heard a woman's voice, one voice, not screaming but something worse than screaming, a sound he could not name. Spotted Eagle was not a man who said things he could not name. He was one of the most precise people I have ever known. He had the specific mind of a man who has spent his life in terrain where being imprecise gets you killed. If he said he could not name the sound, I trusted that. Completely. I sat with what he had told me for a moment. The stars moved. I knew who was at the homestead. I had known for some months. A woman alone, her husband dead of a wagon accident in the summer. I had heard this from the brûlée who passed through in August, and she had stayed on. Stayed on through summer, stayed on into fall, working the place alone with what help she could get from a boy who came out from whatever settlement was nearest, maybe 14 years old, who rode back at dusk every day because his mother would not let him stay the night on account of us, which I understood without bitterness. I had watched the homestead from a distance, not with bad intention. It is simply what I did. I watched the land my people moved across, and that included what settlers had built on it. I noticed things. I kept track of the patterns of a place the way any person responsible for the safety of many people keeps track of what is around them. I had seen her, not closely. A woman of perhaps 35, thin in the way of someone doing hard physical work every day, purposeful in the way of people who cannot afford to waste a step. She kept 2 horses, a milk cow, several chickens, and the calf, which I had noticed with her more than once. The calf was small when I first saw it, small enough that she was bottle feeding it. I had thought at the time it was either an orphaned calf she had taken in or one born weak that the mother had refused, which happens. By October it had grown to maybe 3 or 4 months, still small for its age, but obviously accustomed to people, more than accustomed, attached. When she walked through the yard, it followed her the way a dog follows the person it has decided belongs to it. Not because it was restrained or compelled, but because it had chosen her. I said to Spotted Eagle, "Go sleep, I will see to it." He looked at me for a moment with the look he uses when he knows he is going to have to pretend later that he was not aware of what I was about to do. That look had a kind of long patience in it, the patience of a man who has been walking beside another man long enough to know which arguments are worth making. He decided this one wasn't. He nodded once and went to his lodge. I got my horse. I smelled it before I saw it. Not the blood itself, though there was blood. The smell was the particular smell of something recently killed that was not meant to be killed, which is different from the smell of an animal butchered for food and different again from something dead in the grass. I don't know how to explain that distinction to someone who hasn't encountered it. There is an intention in it, or maybe the word is an affront. Yes, that is more accurate. The smell was an affront. There was enough moon that I could see clearly. The calf was on the step. They had not done it in the barn, which would have been messy enough and contained. They had done it on the step of her front door, which told me everything about what this was: not hunger, not even ordinary cruelty, but a message delivered to one specific place, so that the woman inside would open her door in the morning and find it and understand what the message meant. Which was, we can get to anything you love, any time we choose. I sat on my horse for a moment and looked at the dark cabin. No light inside, no sound. It was very quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a thing. I thought about what Spotted Eagle had said, about the sound she had made. She had been awake then. She had heard it happen or heard them ride away, and she had gone out and seen it, and then she had gone back inside. And what she had done inside after that I did not know, but she had made a sound my scout could not name, and that told me something about what it cost her. Not weakness. A weak woman would have made a recognizable sound, fear or grief or anger. Something in between all of those, something particular, the sound of a person doing the accounting of how much they can continue to sustain. Spotted Eagle could not name it because it did not have an easy name. I got down from my horse. I will not lie to you and say I thought carefully through what I was doing and weighed it against the various considerations of a chief responsible for 63 lodges in a territory where every action I took had implications beyond itself. I didn't. Some choices are not made by the thinking part of a man. They are made by the part that existed before the thinking part got there, the part that says, "This is what needs doing, so you do it." The work took some time. I was quiet about it. I moved the calf away from the step, carried it out past the fence line, and dug a hole with the short-handled spade I found leaning against the side of the barn. The ground was already hardening toward winter, but I got it deep enough. I covered it properly, packed the earth. Then I went to the pump and filled the bucket I found near it, and I cleaned the step as well as I could manage in the dark, which was not completely, but considerably. I stood back and looked at what I had done, which was not much except the removal of an obscenity and the provision of a few hours in which a woman could open her door in the morning without facing the worst of it. I went back to my horse. And then the door opened. She had the rifle leveled at me before I had completed the act of turning around, which meant she had been watching from inside, watching me work through whatever window gave her a sight line, and she had waited. She had waited until she knew what I was, or mostly knew, before she came out. That told me several things at once about who she was, and I filed them all away. I held still. I kept my hands where she could see them. She said in English, "What are you doing on my property?" Not a question exactly. The sound of a woman stating a fact out loud to confirm it. I said in English, because I spoke it reasonably well by then from years of council meetings and negotiations, and the particular school of listening hard in rooms where you are being discussed. I said that I had buried her calf. I said I was sorry I could not do more. She was quiet. Then she said, "Why?" I said because no creature should be left like that on the ground, and because no woman should open her door to it in the morning. Another long quiet. She had dark hair that had come loose from where she had it pinned. She was wearing her work dress still, which told me she had never gone to bed. She had been awakened there in the dark with what was on her step, and she had not been able to sleep and had not expected to. She was holding the rifle without any tremble in it. Some people tremble even when they are competent, the body doing what the body does, but she had either trained it out of herself or had the particular stubbornness of constitution that some people are born with. Either way, it was steady. She said, "I know who you are." I said I expected so. She said, "You're the one they call Iron Elk." I said that was my name. She said, "They say you've run 3 homesteaders out of the valley north of here." I said that was not accurate. I said 2 of those homesteaders had left of their own decision after conversations with my scouts in which no threats were made, and the 3rd I had spoken with personally at length, and we had come to an agreement about shared use of the land that he was still operating under as far as I knew. He was still on his property. She said, "That's not what they tell people in town." I said I was aware of what they told people in town. She looked at me, a long look, the kind that is actually doing something, reading, measuring. She was deciding whether the account she had been given and the man standing in front of her matched each other. She lowered the rifle. Not all the way, she held it pointed at the ground between us, which was an acknowledgment without being a surrender, and I respected that precision. She said, "Will they come back?" I said I thought they would. A pause. She said, "I know." That word said that way. Not defeated, nothing defeated in it, not quite, but with the particular sound of a person who has been alone with a known thing for long enough that saying it out loud is almost a relief. The truth had been there in the cabin with her all night, and now it was just also here, outside in the air. I looked at her in the doorway. The loose hair, the dress she'd never changed out of, the rifle held low and steady, the way she was standing, not presenting herself, not performing anything, just being precisely herself in a hard moment. I made a decision. I have thought about it many times since, whether it was the right one or simply the one I was going to make because of who I am, and I cannot always tell those apart. Maybe they are the same for everyone in the end. I said, there is something I want to offer you and you do not have to accept it, and I mean that without any pressure in it. You can hear it and say no. She waited. I said, I have land. Not mine the way a deed says a thing is owned. I want to be clear about that. I am not going to misrepresent to you what I am giving you. I have land that is my people's land that we move across and use and have used for longer than anyone in this territory has been counting. There is a parcel along the upper creek, about 30 acres, that has good grass and 3 springs and a natural windbreak of cottonwood and rock facing north. It stands largely empty for most of the year. I want to give you the use of it, not the deed. The use. In the way my people understand land, the use is the real thing anyway. She stared at me. I said, you can run cattle on it. You can build what you need. No one from my band will trouble you, and no one from my band would have troubled you here. But over there you will also have the visible fact of my word on it, which changes what the men who did this tonight are dealing with if they follow you. She said, why would you do that? I said I was a man who was tired of watching women left alone with no recourse in a territory full of men who understood no recourse as an invitation. She looked at me. Whatever she was reading in me, she was reading it carefully, not quickly. She said, I need to think about it. I said that was the right answer, and I meant it. I got on my horse. I told her I would come back in 3 days. If she did not want to speak to me again, she only had to not come to the door. I rode back to camp. I should tell you about the land, because it matters to the rest of this. The parcel along the upper creek was real, and it was what I described it to be. The grass there was excellent. The combination of the creek proximity and the windbreak on the north face meant it held moisture later into summer than the open ground, and it came back earlier in spring. The 3 springs were consistent, not seasonal. The cottonwood and rock formation on the north side was the kind of natural shelter that took a long time to appreciate until you had survived a winter with it, and then survived a winter without it and could compare. It was considerably better land than what she had been on. I had been thinking about that parcel for 2 seasons, not about her specifically, about it. What it was doing sitting largely unused when what my people needed, in a time when the government was building a system designed to shrink everything we could call ours, was land that was visibly and actively used. There is a certain kind of occupation that makes a place real in ways that political negotiation cannot. A woman running cattle on land that my people had given her the use of was, among other things, a fact on the ground. Facts on the ground have a different weight than arguments. I am not going to pretend I thought of Nora Ellsworth only in terms of strategy. That would be dishonest. But I am also not going to pretend that a chief in 1876 could separate his personal decisions from what they meant for the people he was responsible for. You cannot. That is part of what it means to be a chief. What you do personally carries the weight of what you represent. Every person who leads anything real knows this. What I can tell you is that giving Nora Ellsworth the use of that land was right in several directions at once. And a thing that is right in several directions at once is usually worth doing. I went back in 3 days. She came to the door before I had dismounted. She said, I'll take it. She said it directly, not tentative, and then she said, but I want to be clear about something. I waited. She said, I'm not charity. I'll work that land the way I worked this one. I intend to run 20 head at least by spring if the grass is what you say it is. I'll build properly. I am not a woman who takes help and then makes herself small about it. I said I knew that. She said, how do you know that? I said I had been watching the homestead since she arrived, and a woman running everything alone and running it well is not invisible to a person who is paying attention. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You've been watching this place all along." I said yes. She said, "That should bother me more than it does." I said most things that should bother people don't, and most things that do bother them shouldn't. She almost smiled. Not quite the kind of almost smile that a person does when something lands but they are not ready to fully let it show. She said, "When can I see the land?" I said, "Now if you want." We rode together in the morning light and I showed her what I had described. She rode through it without speaking for a long time. She got down at each spring and crouched and put her hand in the water, not testing the temperature, just feeling it, the way you feel something to know whether it is real. She stood at the windbreak and looked north into the cold and then turned and looked south at the grass and the creek. At the creek she got down again and looked at the width and the depth and the color of the water, which told her things about what was upstream and what the ground was holding. She had not asked me a single thing while she was doing this. She was doing her own accounting. Finally she looked at me and said, "This is good land." I said I knew. She said, "Better than what I was on." I said, "Considerably." She said, "Then why are you giving it to me?" I said I had already told her. She said, "You told me you were tired of watching women with no recourse. That's a reason to open a door once. It is not a reason to give away 30 acres on the best creek in 30 miles." I looked at her. She was right. It wasn't a sufficient explanation, and she had waited until we were standing on the actual land, until she could see it and know its value before she asked again. That was deliberate. She wanted to ask the question when I could not pretend the gift was smaller than it was. I said, "You are right," and I told her the other part, the part I had not said yet. I said, "I have a son who is 17. I have 63 lodges and the people in them to keep fed and healthy and whole through a winter that is going to be harder than the last one. I have a government that is building right now the framework of a world in which my people's relationship to this land is going to be replaced, systematically and deliberately, with a different arrangement that none of us will have agreed to. I carry that. Every day. I carry the awareness of what is coming and the question of what I can do within it. What a man in my position can still do. What is still within the reach of his arm and his word and his authority. I said, giving you this land standing between you and the men who will come again, this is within the reach of my arm, right now, today. A man who is carrying what I am carrying, who sees something real in front of him that he can actually do, he does it. Not out of sentiment, out of the need to do the work that is in front of you when that work is real. She listened to all of that. She was looking at the creek. Then she said, "All right," not as a concession, as a conclusion. She had weighed what I said and found it credible. All right. She moved to the land before the snow. I sent 3 of my men to help with the moving, which she accepted after a moment's pause, and then used them efficiently and without self-consciousness, directing them the way a woman directs capable people, clearly, specifically, with the assumption that they were competent, which they were. They moved her furniture and her tools and her chickens in crates and her 2 horses and her milk cow. The boy from the settlement came out and helped build the new structure, and I sent 2 of my men who had timber experience to help, and within 10 days she had a cabin that was better than what she had been living in, better positioned, better insulated, better framed. I watched most of this from a distance. I came in closer occasionally, when there was a decision to make or something to say. She always knew when I appeared. That quality in her, the awareness of what was in her surroundings, became familiar to me, something I stopped noticing and then noticed again. In those first weeks she was polite and purposeful and kept her guard in the middle position. Not hostile, not warm. Careful, I understood that. A man she had no reason to trust except the evidence of his actions, and evidence takes time to become something you can lean on. You cannot rush that accumulation and you should not try. The first snow came in November. I checked on the homestead. Everything was properly secured. She had banked the cabin walls with earth and straw on the north and west faces, which was the right thing to do and which most settlers arriving without local knowledge did not know to do. Her horses were in good condition. Her wood was stacked with the cut ends facing in, which keeps the moisture out. She came to the door when she heard me and said, "Come in if you want." I went in. It was the first time I had been inside her cabin. Small, neat, orderly in the way of someone who has learned that disorder costs you time you cannot afford. A fire managed correctly, not too large, not too small, the exact size needed for the space and the cold outside. On the wall near the window she had tacked up a pencil drawing. It took me a moment to place what I was looking at. It was a calf, rough but recognizable. The calf. She saw me look at it. She said, "I drew it from memory. Took me about 4 tries to get it close enough." I said it looked like a good calf. She said, "He was, followed me like a dog. Whenever I was doing the morning chores he would come and put his head against my hip and just lean there. Like he was tired or maybe like he just wanted to know someone was there. I don't know. Animals are strange." She paused. "I know it's foolish to carry on about a calf." I said I did not think it was foolish. I said it was right to honor what you have cared for, and that an animal that has chosen to trust you is not nothing, regardless of what it is. She looked at me for a moment. She had coffee on the fire and she poured 2 cups without asking me if I wanted one, and handed me one, and I took it, and we sat at her table. She said, "The men who did it, have you found out who?" I said yes. She said, "Are you going to do something about it?" I said I was going to speak with certain people. I said that speaking, when it is done right, with the right weight behind it, is usually more effective than people expect. She said, "Meaning you'll make clear what it would cost them to come back." I said that was a reasonable way to put it. She said, "Because of me specifically or because of the land?" I said both. I said they were the same thing now, and I thought she understood what I meant, that when I had given her the use of that land, I had put my word and my authority on it, and what touched her touched both. She looked at her coffee, then she said, "I don't like being something that has to be protected." I said I understood that. She said, "But I know what my options are, and I'm not a fool about them." I said I knew she wasn't. She said, "So, thank you." I said she was welcome. We sat with the coffee for a while. The fire made the sounds a good fire makes when it is well tended. Outside the wind was picking up and a light snow was beginning, the kind that is just weather, not a warning yet. She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. She said, "Your son, the one you mentioned, what is he like?" I said he was 17 and stubborn and smarter than me about half the things that mattered, which was both my greatest satisfaction and my most persistent headache. She almost laughed at that, just almost. She said, "My husband was smarter than me about half the things that mattered. I miss that, having someone to be wrong with." I thought about that for a moment. I said that was a good way to put it, a very particular thing that, someone to be wrong with. She said, "How long ago did you lose your wife?" I said 14 years, the first one. The second I had divorced, in the proper way my people have for such things, and she had remarried a good man and was content. She said, "I'm sorry about the first one." I said it was a long time ago. She said, "It's not though, is it?" I looked at her. She was looking at her hands around the coffee cup. She was not asking to be sympathetic, or not only for that. She was asking because she was 14 months past her own loss, and she understood something about the way grief does not respect the calendar. I said, "No, it's not." We sat there a while longer, not saying anything particular. The way 2 people sit sometimes when talking and not talking are equally possible and both are fine. Winter deepened, and I kept my word. I came to the land every week or 2, sometimes more often when the cold made checking on things more necessary. Always with a reason: firewood, news from the territory, something practical to look in on. We both knew after a while that the reason was secondary. We talked. We talked about her cattle plans, which were detailed and realistic. We talked about the territory, the news that moved through it by way of scouts and travelers and the Brule and Oglala who passed through. She listened to those conversations with the attention of a person who understood that what happened beyond her fence line had direct consequences for what happened inside it. She never pretended not to understand what I was dealing with. That was rare. Most people who were not Lakota either did not understand or preferred not to. It was simpler not to, and of those who did understand, most preferred not to say so directly, as if acknowledging it created an obligation. She did not operate that way. She said what she saw. I respected that more than I can easily explain because it was so infrequent. In December, Chaska came with me one afternoon and met her. He was trying to be very serious about it, in the way of 17-year-olds who are attempting to appear 25. She treated him exactly as she treated me, with direct attention, plain questions, the assumption that his answers were worth listening to. She showed him what she was planning to do with the land in the spring, explaining her thinking, and he listened and asked good questions. On the ride back, he said to me, "She's not what I expected." I asked him what he had expected. He thought about it for a long time. He said, "Someone who needed things from you." I said, "She does need things from me. That is not the same as someone who only needs things from you." He was quiet for a while, turning that over. Then he said, "That's actually a real distinction, isn't it?" I said it was one of the most important ones. January was hard. The cold came down in the first week with a weight and a thoroughness that is difficult to describe to someone who has not been inside it. Not cold as a temperature, but cold as a presence, as an intention. My band lost 2 horses to it. We lost the elder Matho Ska, White Bear, who had been weakening since fall and who went quietly in the night, which we were grateful for, but whose absence from the council I felt for a long time after, because he had a particular way of silencing a room by saying less than anyone else and meaning more. I went to the homestead in the second week of January to check on things. I found Nora in the barn with one of her horses, which had gone sick with a fever. She had been with it through the night, she said, which she told me not as a complaint but as information. She was giving me the picture of the situation clearly so I could assess it. She had done what she could with what she had, which was not enough for this. I sent for our healer, Thathanka Inyan Stone Bull, who had a particular knowledge of horses that went beyond anything I could explain, a combination of long observation and inherited knowledge, and what I can only call a quality of attention that the horses themselves seem to respond to. He came the next morning. He examined the horse carefully, the whole of it, not just the visible symptoms but the way it was holding its weight, the sound of its breathing, the condition of the hooves. He said it was a fever from a wet leg not dried properly after a creek crossing, and he knew what to do. He worked for 2 hours and then he gave Nora a set of instructions, specific and detailed. She followed them without modification or improvisation over the next week, which is not as common as you might think. People receive instructions and then decide they know better, or they miss the part about consistency, or they stop early because the visible symptoms have improved and they think the job is done. She did none of that. She followed the instructions exactly. The horse recovered. She came to my camp to tell me. She came herself, rode in the middle of the afternoon without sending word first, which I noticed because it was a change. She was past a certain threshold. She had decided she did not need to announce herself. She found me at the fire with my brother Chask and a younger warrior named Wanbli Thanka, Big Eagle, who was 24, and who looked at Nora with direct, unconcealed curiosity. She looked back at him without embarrassment or performance, took him in as a fact, and then looked at me. She said, "The horse is well." I said I was glad. She said, "Stone Bull should know. Is he here?" I said I would take her to him. We walked through the camp. She walked the way she walked, everywhere level, taking things in, not performing anything, not making herself appear comfortable or comfortable adjacent as a courtesy to observers, just herself in a place she had not been. Children stopped and looked at her. She noticed them and made small acknowledgments, a look, a slight nod, not performing warmth but not being remote either, just the acknowledgment of one person to another. Stone Bull was pleased about the horse. He and Nora spoke at some length through my translation, and about partway through she attempted a word in Lakota. She had been practicing, she explained, using a phrase book she had found in the bottom of a packing crate. Stone Bull looked at her and then at me and then laughed out loud, genuine, the laugh of a man who has encountered something unexpected and good. She looked at me and said, "I said it wrong." I told her she had said it mostly right, but with the rhythm of someone who learned it from a page. The sounds were close, but the cadence was off. She had been attempting to say thank you, the simple form. What she had actually said was closer to an expression meaning the elk walks well today, which is also a fine thing to say, simply not what she intended. She said, "What did I say exactly?" I told her. She looked at Stone Bull and said, in careful Lakota, with the wrong cadence but all the sounds approximately right, "The elk walks well today." Stone Bull considered this with great solemnity and said that this was indeed true, and he was glad to hear it. We walked back through the camp. The light was going, that late afternoon light in January that is both cold and beautiful, the long shadows and the particular orange on the snow. She rode out on her recovered horse, and I watched her go, and I stood there watching longer than I needed to. I am going to tell you about a night in March. It was past the worst of winter but not yet spring, that in-between time that is all mud and uncertainty, when the air does not know what it wants to be and neither does the ground. I was awake at my usual hour, the last dark before dawn. I heard horses, too many horses and moving wrong, not the careful, purposeful movement of men traveling or hunting, the deliberate, stated movement of men who want what they're doing to be legible. I was on my horse before Spotted Eagle had finished telling me the direction. There were 9 of them. I found out more about it later. The man behind it was Garrett Dolan, who ran cattle on the eastern end of the valley, and who had determined that the arrangement I had made with Nora Ellsworth represented something that needed to be corrected, though he had come to this conclusion without ever once raising the matter with me directly, which told me something about his understanding of his own position. He had sent 9 men with torches, and presumably a specific intent. I had 6 warriors with me. We came out of the dark at a hard run and put ourselves between those 9 men and the cabin before they had cleared the fence line. The fires went out of the torches very quickly when 6 men on horseback emerged from a direction you were not expecting. There is a specific quality to that kind of surprise, not just the surprise itself, but the sudden arithmetic of it, the rapid recalculation of what you thought the evening was. I spoke with the man at the front, whose name was Cord Haney, and whom I knew from other encounters, a man of the type that is very confident in spaces where he has always had the advantage of numbers and the absence of consequence. He said some things then that I am not going to repeat. They are the kind of things such men say, and they do not deserve to be carried further than the moment in which they were said. I looked at him and I said, "This land is under my protection. What you do here, you do to me and to my band and to everything that means. Do you understand me?" He said some additional things. I waited until he was done. Then I said, "Go home, and if you come back here, bring more men than you have now." He went, they all went. I sat on my horse in the dark afterward and listened to the land go quiet around me again. The creek, the wind coming down from the north, then the sound of Nora's door and her voice from the doorway. She said, "Iron elk." I said, "Yes." She said, "Are you hurt?" I said, "No." A pause, then she said, "Come in." I said they were gone, she did not need to. She said, I know they're gone, come in anyway. I got down from my horse. She had the lamp going and coffee on the fire before I was through the door. Moving around the small cabin with the efficiency of a person who has been waiting and has been doing something with her hands to manage the waiting. I sat at the table. She put the coffee down and sat across from me and looked at me in the lamplight. She said, how many? I said 9. She held my eyes, she said, and you brought 6. I said we were enough. She was quiet for a moment, looking at me, and then she said quietly, this is the 2nd time. I said it was. She said, there won't be a 3rd. I said I did not think so. I said I was going to pay a visit to Garrett Dolan in the morning and have a conversation I expected would clarify the situation permanently, and I said she should come with me if she was willing. She looked at me. She said, why me? I said, because he needs to see you there, not protected behind me. He needs to understand that you are not something to be moved, that you are on this land because you chose to be here. If I go alone, he thinks about me. If you go with me, he thinks about both of us together. That is a different calculation for him. She thought about that for a moment, then she said, yes, I'll come. She looked at her coffee. The lamp burned steady between us. Then she said, I raised that calf from 3 days old. He was born with a twisted front leg. The mother wouldn't take him. I straightened the leg myself over 6 weeks, a little every day, and I bottle-fed him and then taught him to graze, and he grew up following me around the yard. She stopped. They killed him on my step because they could, because nothing was there to stop them. She was not crying. She was somewhere past crying or beside it, in the place a person gets to when they have done the crying already, and what is left is just the fact of it, the pure weight of the thing without the release. She said, I am so tired of men deciding what they can take. I said, I know. She looked at me. The fire was burning down. The lamp was steady. She said, you haven't taken anything. I said I had not intended to. She said, I know you haven't. That's not, it doesn't just happen. A man in your position with the authority you have, choosing not to take something because he could, that's a choice. That's not automatic. She looked at me steadily. You've given me something instead. I said it was land that was mine to give the use of. She said, it's not about the land. I waited. She said, you've given me the fact of you being there, between me and the men who would finish what they started, not because anyone was making you, because you decided to. She shook her head slightly, not in negation but the way you shake your head when you are feeling the weight of something. That is not a small thing. That is not nothing. I sat with that for a moment. I said, I am going to tell you something honest. She waited. I said, I am a chief in a time when being a chief is changing in ways I cannot stop and can barely slow down. I carry 63 lodges. I carry the welfare of everyone in them, the children, the elders, the people who depend on decisions I make being the right ones. I carry what is coming. I carry what we have already lost, which is not nothing. I carry the question of what my son is going to inherit and whether it will be enough for him to build something on. All of that. Every day. I said, a man who carries what I carry, when he sees something he can actually do, something real within the reach of his arm and his word, he does it. Not because of sentiment, because you do the real work in front of you when it is there. That is all. That is the whole of it. She listened to all of that. She sat very still. Then she said quietly, but you kept coming back. I looked at her. She said, you did what you needed to do with the land, with standing between me and those men. You could have sent someone else to check on things. You kept coming yourself. I said yes. She looked at me for a long time. The lamp between us was burning steady and clean, the oil good and the wick trimmed right. The fire behind her had settled to its last reliable coals. She said, I kept looking for your horse on the ridge. I said, I know. She said, I don't know what to do with that. I said, neither do I. She reached across the table and she put her hand over mine. Not a gesture, not a performance. The way you put a hand over something to hold it still or to say, I am here. That is all. Her hand was rougher than most women's hands, calloused, weathered, the hands of someone who has not been doing work someone else could avoid. It was warm. She left it there, and I turned my hand over and I held it. We sat like that for a while. The fire made its last sounds. Outside, the wind went from a voice to just weather. I said I should go. She said, I know. Neither of us moved for a moment longer. We went to Garrett Dolan in the morning. I rode with Spotted Eagle and Big Eagle. Nora rode with us. She had put on her good coat, the dark wool one, and she rode level and steady, and she had her rifle in the scabbard, and she looked exactly like what she was, which was a woman who had made her accounting of the situation and had arrived at a decision. Dolan came out on his porch when he saw us. A big man, gone heavy in the middle, with the particular manner of a man who has been the largest presence in a small world for a long time and has come to mistake that for being large in the world generally. He looked at me first, which was what I expected. Then he looked at Nora. She spoke before I did. She said, Mr. Dolan, I know you sent those men last night. He started to form a response. She said, I'm not here to argue about whether you sent them. I'm here to tell you something. I am on that land because Iron Elk gave me the use of it with his word and his authority behind it, and anything that comes to that land comes to him. I think you understand what that means. She paused. She said, the calf you had butchered on my step, I raised him from 3 days old. I want you to know that. I want you to have to think about that for however long you go on. Then she looked at me. She was done. She had said what she came to say, and she was satisfied with it. I looked at Dolan. I said, she has said what needs to be said. I will add only this. I do not come to a man's door twice. He stood on his porch and he worked out the arithmetic. You could see him doing it. Not the moral arithmetic. He was not that kind of man, but the practical arithmetic of risk and consequence, and what he actually had to gain from pressing forward against what he now understood was on the other side. He said, it won't happen again. We rode back. We rode mostly in silence, which was its own kind of conversation. At a certain point on the trail, she glanced over at me, and I glanced at her, and there was something in that exchange that did not require words and did not get any. Spring came the way it comes in that country. Suddenly, all at once, one morning the air entirely different from the morning before, and 3 kinds of birds that had not been there the day before, and the smell of the ground opening up after a long time closed. Nora had 23 head by then. She had bought 8 from a man near the settlement and 3 from a rancher moving on, and the rest through a combination of trading and patient negotiation, and a certain strategic shrewdness that I had helped with in terms of introductions, but that she had done herself in terms of execution. The land was holding them well. The creek grass was coming in thick and early, the way it does on that parcel. My son came with me the day we walked her cattle together in the new spring. He was 18 now, and had grown over the winter into something that surprised me when I looked at him directly. Not the idea of him that I carried around, which was still somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 years old, but the actual person he was, which was a young man of considerable substance. He and Nora talked about the cattle for a long time while I stood back a little and watched. She showed him the 2 she was most pleased with, the black cow and the calf the cow had dropped in March, and she walked him through her plan for the herd over the next 2 years, which was specific and financially reasoned. He asked good questions, the kind that come from actually paying attention, not the kind that come from wanting to appear to be paying attention. On the ride back he said to me, she likes you. I said I knew. He said, do you like her? I said yes. He rode for a while, then he said good. Just that, good. No embellishment, no follow-on. 18 years old, and sometimes he spoke like a man who had thought about something for longer than he had been alive. I said, "It is not simple." He said, "Most things worth anything aren't." I said, "When did you become a philosopher?" He said, "I learned from watching you make everything complicated." I looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, riding easily, the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. I said, "You are your mother's son." He said, "You say that like it isn't the best thing you could say about me." It was the best thing. There was a council in early May that I need to tell you about, because it is part of this. The elders came, 4 of them, the ones whose opinion carried the weight of long memory. They came at evening, which is the right time for serious things, and we sat around the fire and drank the coffee that White Feather Woman made, which was terrible coffee, but no one was going to say so. And after a while Hawk Feather, who was the oldest and who had a way of reaching the point that was both indirect and inevitable, asked me about the woman at the upper creek. He did not ask it as an accusation. He asked it as a question, which is the way a good elder asks most things, because a question puts the person answering in the position of forming their own account, which is more honest than defending yourself against a stated charge. I told him about the night of the calf and what I had done and why. I told him about the land. I told him about standing between Nora and the 9 men Garrett Dolan had sent. The fire burned. The others listened. Hawk Feather listened without his face doing anything in particular. When I was done, he said, "The land, tell me about the land." I said what I had said to Nora, that it was land we used in summer and that stood largely empty otherwise, and that a woman running cattle on it was a kind of occupation that had a certain practical value in what was coming. Facts on the ground. He said, "Is that the reason?" I said, "It is one of the reasons." He said, "Tell me the others." The fire, the dark around us, the sound of the camp going about its evening. I said, "I am a man who has led for 11 years. I have made decisions in that time that I am not entirely at peace with, because leading is not a clean work. It is full of the compromises and the partial choices and the things you do to avoid a worse thing, and none of it sits in you without some weight." I said, "I had an opportunity to do something that was right in all directions at once. Simple, unambiguous. Protect a woman on land that is mine to give. Stand between her and men who understand the absence of protection as permission. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I still have the authority to do right things, and I do not take that for granted." Hawk Feather looked at me for a long time. He said, "And the woman herself?" I said, "She is a good woman, strong, honest, capable. She does not ask for more than she is owed, and she does not take less." He said, "You respect her?" I said, "Yes." He said, "More than that?" I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Yes, more than that." He nodded. He looked at the fire. He said, "A man who leads a people in a hard time needs something that is his own, something that is not the weight, not the responsibility, not the question of what comes after, something that is his." He said, "Your father had your mother. Your uncle had the river, which is a different thing, but you understand me." I said I understood him. He said, "Do what you are going to do, and be honest with yourself about what it is." I said I was trying to be. He said, "I know. That is why I am not telling you not to." The council ended and the elders went back to their lodges, and I sat by the fire alone for a while, with what Hawk Feather had said, which was the clearest thing anyone had said to me in months. Be honest with yourself about what it is. I had been honest with Nora. I had told her the reasons that were practical and true. I had told her that I did the real work in front of me when that work was there. All of that was accurate. What I had not said, to her or to myself in exact words, was the part that Hawk Feather had named. She was something that was mine, not in the way of ownership, which is a small and stupid idea. In the way of choice, something I had chosen and that had chosen me back, and that was not the burden of the people or the weight of what was coming or the question of what my son would inherit. It was its own thing, separate, mine. I sat with that by the fire until the coals went down and the camp went quiet and the stars moved. The next morning I rode out to the upper creek, not with a reason I had prepared, just because I was going. She was at the woodpile when I came through the fence line, splitting kindling with a hatchet she had dressed the handle of herself. I could tell from the wrap, the particular way she had whipped it tight, the same method she used on her tool handles generally. She split 4 pieces without stopping when she heard me ride in, finishing what she was doing before she looked up. That was characteristic of her. She finished her things. She looked up and said, "You look like you've been up all night." I said, "I was at council most of the night." She said, "The elders." I said, "Yes." She set the hatchet down and straightened. She looked at me carefully. She said, "About the land." I said, "About the land, about you." She held very still. She said, "And?" I said, "Hawkfeather told me to be honest with myself about what this is, what I am doing here, what I keep coming back to." She looked at me, the woodpile behind her, the hatchet, the bright May morning. She said, "What did you tell him?" I said I told him the truth, that I respected her. That it was more than that. She was quiet for a long moment. A horse shifted in her barn. A chickadee was doing something determined in the cottonwood at the fence line. She said he wasn't against it. I said he was not against it. She said, "Good." She said it the way my son had said good, complete, final, no embellishment. She picked up the hatchet again, looked at the remaining kindling and set it back down. She turned toward me. She said, "I have been thinking about what I want, about what this is from my side of it. I've been thinking about it since January, and I've been careful about it, because I know that a woman in my position, alone, obligated to you in the ways I'm obligated, I know what it can look like if she starts to feel things she isn't sure about. And I didn't want to be someone who mistakes gratitude for something else, or who leans on a man because she has no one else to lean on." I said, "That is a careful way to think." She said, "It's the honest way." She looked at me. "But I've been careful long enough, and what I keep finding when I look at it honestly is that it isn't gratitude, it isn't need. I have stood on my own before and I can stand on my own now. This is something else." I said, "What is it?" She said, "You know what it is." I said, "I want to hear you say it." She looked at me for a long moment. The chickadee was still at work in the cottonwood. The creek moved. She said, "I think you are the most trustworthy man I have ever been given the chance to know. And I think about you more than I think about anything else that isn't directly in front of me needing to be done. And when you ride up to that fence line, I have to do something deliberate with my face, so it doesn't show how glad I am that you're there." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. No decoration on it, no performance. I got down from my horse. She met me at the fence line and she looked up at me and she said, "I know it's not simple." I said, "Chascaluda says most things worth anything aren't." She almost smiled, then she said, "Smart boy." I said, "He gets it from his mother." She reached up and put her hand against my jaw. Just her palm, flat against my jaw, the way you put your hand on something you want to know is real. I put my hand over hers. We stood like that, at the fence between the open land and what she had built. The sun was full up by now, the day properly started, everything clear and warm and in its right place. Late May. The cottonwoods fully out, the new leaves that particular color they are in late May before summer deepens them. Not yet green, still the silver green that moves in a breeze like water moves, a shimmer rather than a wave. I had come to the land on my own. No particular purpose I was willing to name yet. She was in the yard with the black cow and the calf's front leg that had been troubling her. She was crouched beside it with her hands on the leg, talking to it, not to herself, to the calf, telling it what she was going to do and asking it essentially to cooperate. Animals understand more of that than people credit them with. Or maybe what they understand is not the words but the intention behind them, the steadiness of the voice, the quality of the attention. I sat on my horse at the fence line and watched her work. She finished. She stood up and she looked at me. She did not look surprised to see me, which was its own thing. She had stopped being surprised when I appeared, and I had stopped noticing that she had stopped, and then I had noticed it again, the way you notice something familiar that has become so familiar you had stopped seeing it. She walked toward me. She stopped at the fence. She said, "The leg's coming around." I said that was good. She said, "I named her." I said, "The calf." She said, "After the first one." Not the same name, but she needed a name. She needed to be something to someone. I said, "What did you name her?" She said a word in Lakota. Not quite right, the vowel in the middle was off but close. The word for new morning. I looked at her. She said, "Stone Bull has been teaching me. He finds me extremely entertaining." I said Stone Bull found the whole world entertaining, which was his greatest gift, and also made him occasionally exhausting in a council setting. She laughed. A full laugh this time, real, unguarded, not the almost smile or the wry edge but a genuine thing that changed her whole face, opened something in it that I had not seen before. She looked up at me on the horse. The sun was behind me. The cottonwood leaves were moving the way they move. She said, "Get down from the horse, Iron Elk." I got down. She looked at me standing there in front of her. Something in her face was open in a way it had not been on any of the other days. She stepped around the fence and she came to stand beside me and she looked out at the land, her cattle, the creek moving, the grass full and green, the cottonwood windbreak standing against whatever the north would send, and she put her hand against my arm. Not holding it, not a grip, the flat of her hand, warm, steady, the way you put your hand against something solid that you want to be sure is there. She said, "Thank you." Not for any one thing, for all of it, for the land and the defense of it and the coming back, and for the fact of standing beside her instead of over her. For doing the work of a strong man, without making her small in the doing of it. I looked out at what she had built on the ground I had given her the use of, and what I had stood between her and what we had both kept coming back to. I said, "You built this, I gave you the ground." She said, "Yes, both of those things." She leaned against my shoulder, just slightly, not collapsing, not needing. A choice. The deliberate lean of a woman who knows what she is doing when she does it and who has decided. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my arm. The black cow and her calf were at the creek. The calf, the new morning, was moving well on the healing leg. The creek ran high with the snow melt, fast and quiet at the same time, the good sound of water that is going somewhere it has always known how to go. The cottonwood leaves moved. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the grass, the full spring call, the one that means it has staked its ground and is certain of it. We stood there a while, neither of us needing to say anything further. I was a man of 41 with 63 lodges and the weight of a people, and a time bearing down on me in ways I could neither stop nor fully name. I was standing on land I had given the use of to a woman who had taken it and made it something. And I was standing beside her, my hand over hers, the sun warm on the back of my neck, the cottonwoods in their silver green. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.